if our hope was in the House, if our hope was in the executive branch, if our hope was in the legislature branch or the judicial branch, then honestly, the way things are going, especially now, like I would probably feel hopeless, and, so tying back into what we ended the show with last week, and we want to start this show off with is, what do we need to put our hope in? Like, and what do we have our hope in? Like, if you don't have your hope in God, there's a lot of like situations going on right now where, we're putting our faith and our hope in something that. Talk show, where we're kicking it and having fun on inspirational radio. We're the talk show, kicking it and having fun. So turn your radio up. Ultimately gives us hopelessness. So even if your party is winning or your party is the majority or whatever, you can't look at what's going on right now in America, what's going on in the world and say, just based off of what we're bringing to it that you can have hope. And so if that's all you place your hope in, right, which I think is the foundation of why that question was asked last week, we all know that we're not perfect people. Like there's nobody perfect. Like there's a lot of bad stuff going on in this world. So, what do we do with that? And so, Lasagna, I know you got a guest there. I don't know if, all of us are, a little bit over about 4 generations in, a couple of decades, about 4 decades. But, that question came from someone in a very young generation, in the 20s, so definitely would like to hear the the thoughts of someone that is closer to that generation. So Lasagna, I'm gonna let you do the introduction, and then let's just jump right in and see what you got to share with us and share with this world.
Okay, awesome. Yes, I had asked my nephew because he's in his 20s and asked him to join me on the show to see if he just give us thoughts on what he thinks if his generation, how he feels about what they can put their hope in. Yep, and it's my nephew's name is Jaquel Witt, and he's going to give us his insight on his generation and what he thinks or feels.
Every time I see you, Jaquel, man, you get swoller and swoller, man.
Hey, I appreciate you.
Hey, you want to come on over?
Long time no see. How you doing?
Good, man. Good to have you on the show.
Yep.
Okay, there we go.
I don't think I met Dion before. How you doing, Dion? I'm Jock. Nice to meet you. Oh, okay, he's muted. Okay.
He can talk now.
Oh, he can talk now.
What's going on? Yeah, what was the question? Real quick.
So, last week we had a topic where it was an atheist that wanted to understand why a perfect God would create imperfect people, right? And so we kind of went through the whole background of that and what our thoughts on with that. But the last part of that led to hope, where if you're a person who doesn't believe in God or, what is your hope in, and, when we look at this world, it feels like there's a lot of hopelessness, which is probably, the issue or part of the issue is because, we put our hope in a lot of things that aren't sturdy, that aren't good, aren't reliable, basically.
Yeah.
So, Lasagna, Lasagna suggested, and I think it's a great idea, is we wanted to hear from someone in your generation about, one, how you see society. You can definitely share what your hope, may be in and why your hope is in that and, kind of what that's done for your life or any recommendations you have for people in your generation.
That's incredible. Hey, Sheldon, I feel like I'm perfectly suited to answer this question because, I would say by the time I was about 13, 14 roughly, I was into authors. I don't know if you ever heard of these authors, but their names are Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, it's Daniel Dennett, and Richard Dawkins, right? Now they call these guys the 4 horsemen of atheism, right? Or they call them the 4 horsemen of reason, rather. So I did a lot of that reading. And so by the time you can grasp an understanding of, the modern concepts of things like evolution and even maybe a dash or two of astrophysics, right? And concepts like surrounding the Big Bang and whatnot, I feel like it's a lot of our generation feels in a way too smart for God, right? Or it's like because the older generation didn't understand it on a level to really tell us beyond this is the way it is, you asking the wrong questions. But I'm like, okay, and that's a brilliant question that the atheist asked, because I was from about 14 to probably 21, if you would have asked me, I was a card carrying atheist, right? I had every argument prepared. It was like one of the, like God, believe it or not, being an atheist, and even now today, it was like the topic that I spent the most time on, more than any other time, even looking back. I thought I was studying the sciences and becoming scientifically literate, but I was looking for God, or looking for where he wasn't, at least, you know what I mean? Or trying to see where he wasn't. And I feel like for the most part, I don't want to blame the older generation, because they did the best they could. Right. And that's about it. They did the best they could. So it's okay. So meaning I'm not upset with them. I'm a tad disappointed, but they could only do the best they could. So when we asked these questions and they had no answers for us, it developed into a kind of resentment, a kind of bitterness, a kind of lashing out. You know what I mean? It was like it was like, oh, you being disrespectful. You see, you think you too smart. You think you this and that. You know what I mean? So
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I heard that in my generations.
Right. So a lot of kids, deviated from spirituality. And then also you have to think that we have so many, how do you say, institutions, cultural institutions, so many organizations that are absolutely committed to not only hiding God, but making God seem silly, making God seem, in a way primitive, or, it's a low IQ thing to believe in God. Like you have the music industry, you have schools, prayer being taken out of the schools. You have everything that's going on, this regular culture. You look at fashion, you look at art, you look at all these different domains. And it's so funny, I know I'm going on a tangent. I'll bring it back. I'll land the plane. But
It's cool.
but I was thinking about this verse, and it's been a while since I read this specific chapter, this section of the Bible, but I thought about it in a way I had never thought about it, right? So Jesus was in the wilderness and he was fasting for that period of time. He was fasting, and Satan comes out, hey, if you are, hungry, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but if you're the Son of God, then turn this stone into some bread because you're hungry, right? And he had him, particularly, it's this section. He had him look at all the kingdoms, probably Persia, probably Egypt, Rome, all these various powerful kingdoms. Hey, I can give it all to you, right? It can be yours. All you have to do is bow, right? But I think the important bit of that, one of the important bits is not just simply that he didn't bow, but it's that those were Satan's to give. It's like, if those weren't Satan's to give in the first place, there's no way he would offer it to you. And Jesus didn't say, hey, those aren't yours to give. His name is the Prince of the Air. So, I mean, it's more blatant than ever in terms of how anti-God our mainstream cultures are. But, this is genuinely his realm in a sense. You know what I mean? Even though we are in the world, we are not of the world. But I feel like for so long, he's ran things in a way. So I just feel like it's out in the open. But back to what I was saying regarding, atheism and the question of, so for the most part, Viktor Frankl has this quote. He says, a man who does not have purpose will distract himself with pleasure, right? For the most part. And I feel like once you remove God, all the culture institutions that are dedicated to removing God, I feel like the only thing that's left is nihilism in a sense, right? Because it's hard to make it without the spiritual aspect of things. It's hard to make an argument for, being a moral person and being about the right, or you're only about the right to get something. You know what I mean? Like God pretty much creates our moral framework. So with all these, institutions and all these, even in school and whatnot, there's this effort to hide God. I feel like pretty much atheism and the lack of God is synonymous with nihilism, right? Because we're using words like hope and hopelessness, right? But I think more profound terms to you, or not profound, but terms that are more precise, I feel like are meaninglessness and nihilism. And then you also have purpose, and then you have nihilism. And they're antithesis. They're the antithesis of each other. So it's like if you have purpose, you can't fall to nihilism.
Right.
And right. And if you are genuinely a nihilist, and no one's truly a nihilist because you would just, commit suicide or just stay in your room all day. No one's genuinely a nihilist. So what ends up happening is a kind of lashing out at God. And I feel like that's showing up in, the depression rates of young people, that's showing up in the suicide rates, that's showing up in all the dark things that you're hearing about Gen Z. And also we have problems that humanity's literally never faced before. So you often hear, this young generation, they're soft, they're weak, they don't want to work, something's wrong with them. And at some level, I agree, but it's also, we have issues that no one else has ever faced before. You know what I mean? Like, you guys didn't have social media. If you got in a fight like 30 years ago, right? If you got in a fight with somebody 30 years ago and you lost, right? Boom, dude beat you up on camera, right? He beat you up, okay, boom, y'all shake hands and it's over. It's fine. No big deal. But now it's permanently sketched into pixels forever. And that's true for every moment of your waking life.
World star.
Yeah, world star, yes. I work at a training facility, right? And I'm a strength coach, performance coach at a basketball training facility. And one of the number one things that I try to get out of my kids, right, when I'm training them, is this desperation to not be called either, like the modern words, cringe or weird or lame. You don't want to see lame. And because we live in this world of social media where everything is ossified, meaning like it's etched into the stone of pixels on a screen. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's always like, oh man, they're going to call me this. They're going to think I'm this. I better not seem too into this. I better not seem not too into this. It's like this, I call it performative nihilism, right? You want to be this fake neutral. You know what I mean? I think it kind of creates a sort of, again, like we talked about, sort of meaninglessness. And that's another one of those, I don't know if it's on purpose, but it's definitely one of the things that are working against us that creates this kind of, vast dichotomy, pushing kids towards not having hope. And then you also have things like, the economy and, kids, buying a house is out now and I'm, quiet quitting. We've all heard of stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the times the older generation, how do you say there's a disconnect because of the fact that you don't live quite in the same world that we do, that we grew up in, you know what I mean?
Right.
But with that being said, I mean, I feel as if fundamentally this is a spiritual issue. So we could talk about all the detail in terms of social media and the economy, but I think fundamentally this is both and the older generation, like, again, I don't blame them, but they couldn't have prepared us for this because they didn't know this was on the way, and they did the absolute best they could. They didn't have access to all the information, and their kids weren't as willing to. I know you've probably heard this before, but they say this is the show me generation, right? You have to show me, right? So growing up, and I remember, and my auntie probably remembers, the many days of me, because it wasn't just, you don't just leave God and be fine, right? So meaning like, yeah, you can definitely, you can perform fine, meaning like, oh yeah, I'm okay. But there is a lashing out, you're mad at your family, you're mad at the world, you're mad at the environment. You're like, man, like God is, like you said, the beginning question, if God, is who he says he is, and this is the atheist, he is either impotent to alter his own universe, or he's ignorant of the horror that exists in his universe. And with that being the sentiment, it's just not as simple. It's not simple, but I think it's a profound misunderstanding of both God and I think there's a philosophical disconnect of what the Bible is actually trying to communicate to us in a way. So
And here's what I would say. First of all, Sonia, this was a great idea, right? I am so inspired, one, by your transparency, by your testimony, by, how eloquently you're even breaking this down, because, and it's so funny. I don't know if you heard the last show or any of our shows, but, one of the things
I've tuned in a few times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he be keeping up with his auntie.
One of the things we do take accountability for as Christians is, I don't think we represent God correctly. I don't think we represent we say we read the Bible and even scriptures. I don't think we represent it right. We represent it from a standpoint. You mentioned something earlier, and I wrote this down on my pad here. I remember growing up in my generation and then saying, don't question God. You know what I mean? So something bad happens in my life where I'm confused and I don't know what's going on. Don't talk to God about it. And here's the issue with that. For me, and now that I'm older and now that I've kind of bucked that religious dogma about it, is I question God all the time. Like when something crazy happens to me, I'm talking about it. Now, a couple of things happens here. He'll reveal something about the situation that I didn't really think about, or he'll reveal something about me that may have, added to the situation. But I think that was the start, because you got to think that's the generation before your generation that was getting that. And the generation before that, probably was, getting that same thing. So each generation, I think, feels the consequences of us not really, seeking God the way we need to be seeking him. And it's such a catch-22 for me because, I've shared this with Lasagna and Dion before. I knew a lot about science before I knew God. You know what I mean? And matter of fact, I'm a very big person still. I think I have a very scientific mind. I understand things, and I want to know the facts behind things, how things work and things like that. So, but, the more I ask questions with this, and this is, how I want to bring it home too, is, when I think about the Big Bang Theory and I think about all these other things that are scientifically trying to explain something, it always leads to a question that we can't answer, or a question that is only answered if there's something outside of, what we can see and what we can feel and of these five senses. You know what I mean? And that's where, I see it. So I don't, when I'm talking to an atheist or a non-believer, I really can understand a lot where they're coming from if they're talking from that standpoint. But again, no matter what you break down for me, at some point we're going to get to a roadblock where, that just hasn't been figured out yet. No, it's never going to be figured out, unless you add this piece to it. You know what I mean? And that's what I think, needs to happen. And as a Christian, I think we've been so, set in a religious way. It's kind of like, I look back, and Jesus had to deal with this when he was walking on this earth. Religious Pharisees and Sadducees, they were the people that, knew the law, knew the religion, and knew everything. And so here he is enacting it. He is the Word of God. And really the embodiment of it, and he's not acting in the way that they've perceived that the Word of God, all the years that they've learned it, all the years that they've, understood it, he's walking in a way that's showing them a different layer of that, they can't even recognize it. When he's talking about the Sabbath, and he was like, the whole reason for the Sabbath was for man to tell you need to rest. So the day and what you do on that day and all of that kind of stuff, you came up with that type of stuff. And I think, that's what muddles the water or muddles the conversation when someone's really talking about, God and religion. You know what I mean?
I do know exactly. So the theory you just mentioned so the current pop sci idea currently is surrounding that. And I'm not going to get super duper deep into that, but like you said, it's like, okay, well, we'll never find out. We'll never figure it out, So that theory is called, that framework is called the God of the gaps. So, for instance, it's like, well, and I think it diminishes God in a way. Now,